Howdy! Been a minute since I've seen you guys. Sorry about that. Nothing too crazy has been going on. I have been juggling some things just because YouTube isn't full-time, so I can't do it full-time, but also I haven't been making as many videos because I guess the music industry has collectively decided that we don't need albums anymore because they haven't been releasing very many. So because of that, I haven't really been able to make new reviews, but I have been continuing with doing stuff for this series. So now that I'm here, let us continue with what I like to call Music Review YouTube's little engine that is 10 years later, which is the series where I talk about albums from the 2010s that were either impactful to me, impactful to music in general, very popular, or just worth revisiting 10 years later for good or bad reasons. And here we have an album that's very interesting to me. Usually if a record leaves me pretty indifferent, I find myself not really having enough to say about the album in a proper video, but we have officially found a record that has bucked that trend. As you can tell from the title, the album that we'll be talking about today is the 2012 Fun album, Some Nights. Fun was a New York City indie pop rock band consisting of instrumentalist Andrew Dost, lead singer Nate Ruess, and the legend himself Jack Antonoff, who I honestly had no idea was in the band until I was doing research for this video. Fun had their first taste of putting out music with 2009's Aim It Ignite, and shortly after that album's release, the band was signed to Fueled by Ramen, which may in some eyes take away the whole indie part of the band, but the idea of what classifies as indie in any medium is a can of worms for another day. The group then put together this album heavily inspired by some of Nate's then recent listenings to hip-hop music. He notably cited Kanye West's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy as an inspiration. Now, while this project, an 11-track, 43-minute album from an indie pop act that hadn't really seen mainstream success beforehand, might come across rather unassuming, Fun would honestly go through a period where they were absolutely dominating the popular music landscape. The lead single We Are Young featuring Janelle Monáe, fueled by a Glee cover as well as an appearance in a Super Bowl commercial, rocketed all the way to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and even received a Diamond certification. The title track Some Nights was a sleeper hit that would get to #3 on the Hot 100 and go 7 times platinum, and Carry On was a chart climber that peaked at #20 and would go 2 times platinum. This band was putting out quite a few consecutive hits, winning a pair of Grammys including Best New Artist and Song of the Year for We Are Young, and they were on an absolute roll. And then it was over. Outside of a few EPs and stray singles, the group announced a hiatus in 2015 to work on solo projects and haven't had a proper reunion since. That led me to this album. While We Are Young was a track I despised in my pop music hating youth, I wanted to see if this album was a hidden gem or a relic front-loaded with massive singles that indicated why the band quit while they were ahead. As it turns out, the album served to make Fun an even more curious footnote, and it's an album I'm intrigued by. Even if my feelings are largely indifferent toward it, and I honestly shouldn't have even been able to get a script out of it, given that albums that leave me indifferent are often the hardest to talk about. This project occupies this interesting space in the context of 2012 pop that I honestly can't stop thinking about. The Some Nights intro begins the album with this creepy, almost artsy vibe that makes it feel a bit theatrical. Nate Ruess creates this atmosphere where he struggled with isolation and mundanity in the internet age. It's just a quick lead-in kind of song lasting just under 2 minutes, but I don't mind it, even though it gives off this impression that Fun is trying to do their best Queen meets Panic at the Disco impression. It leads into the proper title track, Some Nights, which was a massive single that I somehow managed to largely avoid throughout 2012, and 2013 for that matter. Listening to it now, I see the popularity and don't mind the song, but I don't really feel like I was missing out all that much. While I can appreciate the song for feeling like a deviation from the electronic dance pop that was all over the pop landscape of yesteryear, I feel like it's one of those songs I can only enjoy in pieces. While I love the soaring, powerful, beautifully sung chorus, the instrumental feels a little too overblown for me. And there are pieces of the song I'm not that crazy about, like that auto-tune singing near the end. I did get a chuckle at the beginning though, because I honestly thought I was listening to a rendition of Kansas's Carry On Wayward Son. We Are Young was a song that was the bane of my existence during my 8th grade year in 2012. Sure, some of that may have stemmed from my huge disdain for popular music at the time, but this was one of those songs I couldn't stand to hear at the time. I had a feeling coming back to it, I wouldn't have as much anger or hatred toward it, whether I enjoyed it or not. And yeah, I can definitely say I don't consider it the bane of my existence like I did before. The somewhat fast-paced beginning of the song threw me off a little bit, and I also got thrown off by how casually the narrator talks about hitting his girlfriend in that first verse. The more I look into the lyrics, honestly, the more surprised I get that someone in my 8th grade class suggested that we sing this during our middle school graduation. Now that said, when the beat drops and we reach that chorus, bliss. It's almost like a fantasy. Everything slows down, and for a minute there's this togetherness between you and your companions, raising a glass and forgetting life's many, many, many problems. I also didn't know until somewhat recently that Janelle Monáe was on the song, and her appearance does feel like a split-second cameo, but it is pretty beautiful in and of itself. As it is, yeah, I can acknowledge that the pop-hating kid in me was a bit harsh on it back in 2012. It's an enjoyable track that I honestly wouldn't mind coming back to in the future. Carry On slows things down a bit compared to the first few tracks, serving as a simple ballad, mixing delicate pianos and some acoustic strums. It does turn itself into something a bit bigger once it reaches the chorus with similar pounding drums to the first few tracks. While I understand why the song moved into something heavier as it fits into the almost Baroque pop style of the album's first half, I honestly preferred the lighter direction of the song and kinda wish it stayed that way. There are still some good vocals from Nate Ruess, and some of the instrumental moments can be solid, but I feel like I'd be more enthusiastic about the song if it stayed in the ballady direction. It gets better as a surprising track as it leans into some almost industrial rock sounds with tons of reverb and vocal filters. This might be an odd comparison, but sonically it honestly sounds like a song that could have fit perfectly in Digimon the movie. Not lyrically though. I'd hope a Digimon movie doesn't have a song in it about someone's first time having sex. I can give it points for experimentation, and I do think Nate Ruess knows a thing or two about crafting a catchy hook, but sadly, some of the production was a little too harsh on my ears and it took away a bit of my enjoyment of the song. Why Am I the One is another track that feels like something of a ballad, being a lot lighter in its instrumental with acoustic plucking and a drum beat that's not as major. The song also takes on a slower, dreamier feel when it hits the chorus, almost sounding like something that wouldn't be out of place in a Beatles song. I like the idea of the track, and I think the instrumental changes are neat, though this is another one of those cases where I feel like I can only enjoy the song in pieces. That chorus is a great section, but I don't find myself getting as excited about the less dreamy bits of the song. All Alone plays off of a story where the narrator finds a girl that his mother isn't exactly excited about. This is a rather bright cut with a bouncy feel to it, emphasizing the drums a bit more heavily and having another dreamy vibe. I like some of the lyrical ideas, what with its metaphors about the wind-up doll and some of the more playful electronic bits play into that almost toyetic feel. Sadly, while the instrumental has some fun to it, I feel like the song could just use a touch more something. It doesn't really stand out as much as I thought it would, and it just ends up being a track that's fine but not amazing. All Alright is the point in the album where things start to get a bit repetitive to me. It certainly doesn't sound bad, but it really continues to lean into that dreamier feel that the previous two cuts played into. Sure, the instrumental takes a few interesting twists here and there, and I like how the song centers around someone being there for you even after you do things badly. Sadly, the hook doesn't grab me quite as much as some of the other songs here, and it ends up just kind of meshing together with several other moments on the album. One Foot is Nate Ruess's statement going against the church's negative view on homosexuality, a very respectable topic for a pop song and one that was very progressive for 2012. The production has these vibrant horns, and despite the drums feeling a bit rough around the edges, the song carries this rather playful vibe. Sadly, it's another cut I can only really respect from afar. The instrumental as a whole doesn't really pick me up, and very little about the song serves to hook. I wish I liked it more, though I can give it a lot of credit for lyrically being pretty progressive for its time. And Stars closes the standard edition on a rather somber downer note. While the instrumental does have a bit of energy to it, playing into some of the theatrical elements of some of the album's other cuts, Nate Ruess bears it all about how fame is affecting him and how the success makes him feel a bit uneasy. I respect how raw and unapologetic he gets with his lyrics, and I think the instrumental does a better job than some of the other ones at balancing some different vibes and styles, which is important for a track that is just under 7 minutes in length. But I found myself less enthralled by Ruess's auto-tune singing. I thought it was cringy on some nights, and it's still cringy here, perhaps even more so given that a good portion of the song is centered around those auto-tune vocals. Nate, I'm sorry, but you are not Kanye. However, there is a bonus track included on Spotify, and that's Out on the Town. And no, I'm not counting the acoustic version of We Are Young as the closer, though. That acoustic version is decent, even if it surprisingly pales in comparison to the original. That version is just too soaring and memorable, so it trumps the acoustic version, even though I'm glad Janelle Monáe got a larger role in the acoustic version. Anyway, Out on the Town plays like a more straightforward pop rock kind of song where the instrumental is bright and bubbly and feels almost inspirational inspirational, which is an interesting juxtaposition with the more sad lyrics where our narrator is trying to get a girl to come back. It's honestly a pretty nice song, as while it's a little more standard than a lot of what else is here, I think that helps it to remain focused and not fall into the trappings of other cuts here. It doesn't feel like it suffers from instrumental switches feeling out of place, and I think the hook manages to be catchy. I know it's weird that one of the least adventurous songs is one of my favorites, but it's one of the few that really puts it all together. A very nice end to the album. Man, you'd think with a record like this, I wouldn't have enough to write out a full script. Turns out I was wrong. I've said this before, but usually when an album leaves me pretty indifferent or has me saying, yeah, that wasn't for me, I end up not feeling the urgency to make a video about it because I feel like I'll have so little to say. Yet, even though this album left me indifferent, I feel like it occupies a rather intriguing space, and even if I don't care much for the content of the album, I'm nevertheless fascinated by it, especially in the context of this series. And that partly has to do with Fun's there and back again history of being at the top for a very short period and then leaving fairly quickly, but it largely has to do with how different this album felt in the context of the popular music landscape in 2012. It would be flat out incorrect for me to say that Fun was the first artist with indie pop roots to achieve mainstream success and have hit songs, and it would be wrong to say Fun was doing something that had never been done before, but honestly they were definitely doing something that mainstream music wasn't doing too much at the time. In a landscape where music was being dominated by big electropop and dance pop stuff, it felt refreshing to see something like this kind of permeate through the airwaves and take on a slightly different sound than what everyone else was. I'll say this myself, but in the first 2 years of 10 Years Later and the little bit I've heard of the third year, looking back at many of the albums I've listened to from 2010, 2011, and thus far 2012, I have definitely heard my fair share of electronic and dance pop style albums, some of which have felt a bit indistinguishable outside of the artist on the cover of the album, and some of which I couldn't even really write scripts for because they just felt so standard. So looking back, this album is something of a refreshing reprieve from all the pop artists beating listeners upside the head with electronic dance anthems. Now, no, I'm not gonna say the album was good merely because it was different or unique to what was out, but there are definitely things to like about this record. The production for the most part is pretty grand, and it does take several twists and turns, even if I feel like quite a few of those twists can kind of mess up the songs a little bit. Nate Roos is a pretty charismatic, powerful vocalist with an ear for good hooks, and while the writing can be a bit hit or miss, the themes can be pretty interesting. As it is, I just feel like it's not really an album I'm begging to re-listen to. Interesting as a lot of its concepts are, there were just a lot of cuts that I felt I could only enjoy in small bits. Still though, I respect the artistic direction of the album and the place that it occupies in relation to early 2010s popular music. I just wish I enjoyed the album a little bit more. I still recommend checking it out if you haven't already, because even if it's not for me, maybe you'll find something I didn't. Back in 2012, my hatred for We Are Young would have probably kept me far away from this thing. Listening to it now, I see what it was doing, but I just couldn't engage with it all that much. If I had to put it on my scale, well, I was initially going to give it an okay, and if I stuck to my conventional rating scale, that's where it would probably land. However, I think I'd probably use this video as a chance to bring back my old not for me rating, as I was finally able to get a script out of an album that I could give that rating to. I honestly kind of want to do that and use other labels to rate albums. After all, my scale is essentially a set of labels more than it is a defined grade or rating, so I may use ratings other than excellent, great, good, okay, bad, and awful in the future. It just depends on what the album does for me, like this one for example. I can respect it from afar and pull a track or two from it, but others will probably get more mileage out of it than I will. Of course though, that's just my opinion on this album. What did you guys think about it? Did you listen to it back in 2012? Do you still listen to it now? Did you love it back then? Hate it back then? Do you still love it now? Do you still hate it now? Are you just completely indifferent towards it? And for those of you that listen to Fun more than I do, would you like to see a reunion? Whatever your thoughts, opinions, and experiences are, leave them down in the comments below. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe and support some of my other ventures that I have linked in the description, thank you. If not, it's no big deal. I totally understand. And I have one more video I'm going to film right when this one goes off, and that's going to be on the Wizard album, Wizard. That's the last of my 2 February 10 Years Later videos, so I'm just going to get that out of the way. So stay tuned for that, but until then, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.